Okay. So recording has begun. So thanks everyone for joining. Today's September 3rd, 2024. Thanks for joining us for office hours today. Last time we had met, I think Intune 2408 was just rolling out. So we didn't really have an opportunity to talk about what was there. So we're going to talk about the new functionality that we've released with 2408. There's actually been a lot more than normal as it pertains at least to Windows. There's also some iOS and Android and Mac OS stuff that's in there as well. But we'll also be talking about some Windows 365 announcements that have been made over the past month or so, as well as some skilling opportunities and some other things. And then we'll also have an open Q&A to wrap up the call today. So for those that are new, or if you weren't here last week, we've revamped the slide deck, so the color scheme and everything is all different. But we've also included a slide here to show who's all on my team. So you've got myself, Scott, Chenille, and Anthony, and then Garrett and Patty round out the 6 of us that are a part of the Endpoint Office Hours team. So this is the U.S. education team that focuses on all of our education customers here in the United States. And we're here to help and assist in any way we can as it pertains to our device management strategies here at Microsoft. For rules and etiquette, just to recap what we talked about last time, and this is fairly typical for any of our office hours if you've been to any of the other communities as well. Just if you're joining, make sure to mute your mic, turn off your camera because we record the sessions. That way you're not in the recording that we post up to YouTube. But if you do have questions, post them in the chat. We do request that you put a Q in front of your questions because the chat can get kind of chatty. However, in this community, it's not so bad, but there's others that have like over 100 or a couple hundred people where it's just a lot of chat going back and forth. So if you can just put a Q in front of the question, that way we can easily identify it as we're going through the list. And then lastly, we've moved all of our communications over to LinkedIn in terms of any questions that get raised outside of office hours, so outside of the hour that we meet every couple of weeks. If you have any additional questions, post them there. We tried using the team the last couple of years, but the challenges we have with the team now is that they've actually deleted all of the people that were in the team that we manually added. So that's one problem. But the other problem is tenant switching becomes somewhat challenging if you have to go back and forth between the tenants to post questions to the team. So we just felt that publicly it's probably easier to use LinkedIn. So the LinkedIn group is there. You can click on that link. That'll take you to it and submit a request to join. I try to answer as many questions as I can from there. So does the rest of our team. And so we're going to make a concerted effort to really be in there on a daily basis to see if anyone has any questions. Before the call, I had mentioned this, but I wanted to also have it here in the recording, is that so chat persistence in Teams meetings now, in the prior year, so the prior fiscal year, the meeting invite that we had for this call allowed for people to chat after the call was over. This year, that's changed. There's been some changes into how Teams meetings work. And one of those changes is that when you invite someone to a meeting, if they're on the meeting itself, if they're on the to line, or if they're CC'd, or they're an optional member, if they're explicitly in the meeting or invited to the meeting, then they will get chat persistence after the meeting is over. If you were not invited to the meeting, then and you're just using like an ICS file, which is what we do. We give you an ICS, we'll email you the ICS file and you add it to your calendar. That means that you're not actually invited to the meeting, you were just forwarded the meeting. Anyone that's forwarded a meeting after the meeting is over, they no longer can chat. And this is consistent across all the office hours communities that we have. And so it's causing somewhat of an issue because a lot of folks like to continue conversations after the meeting is over. If there's a topic that was somewhat engaging and they wanted to keep talking about it, that ends as soon as the meeting ends. And so for us to communicate things to you, like, a day or two later after something, or someone has a follow-up, like there's a question that was answered, we don't have the immediate answer to it, responding through chat is going to be more difficult now. And so this is why the LinkedIn group is important, because if there's something that we need to communicate with you or the community outside of our traditional 1 hour every couple of weeks, we might actually have to post it over there as opposed to just continuing in chat. So just keep that in mind, that the chat will die and you won't be able to communicate after the meeting is over. Okay, so our EDU Endpoint Officer's agenda. So on the 17th, we're going to have Arnab from our Intune CXE team. He's going to come and talk about Platform SSO for Mac OS. He had presented probably about 6 months ago prior to Platform SSO coming out, and so he's agreed to come back and talk about the release and maybe some future improvements, roadmap, those kinds of things. So come check out the meeting if you're using Mac management within your organization. Arnab's going to come and talk about Platform SSO. For October 1st and 15th, we don't have any designated presenters yet. So if you have an idea or if you want to present something that you're doing within your organization you think might be kind of cool, volunteer. Reach out to me. You can say something in chat. We can have a sidebar through email or something to talk about what you may want to present to the community. But this year, we actually want to get more community involvement in our sessions, because you can hear me talk all the time, but it's also good to hear from other folks that have been doing this for a while, whether you're in K-12, whether you're in higher ed, academic, medical. I think all of it's really relevant. And so if you've got an idea or something you want to share with the community, feel free to reach out, and we'll gladly have you come present. And on the 29th, we're going to have our Halloween session. So if you remember last year, we did a Halloween session, and so we'll do the same thing this year as well. Okay, so in terms of updates, the first thing we're going to talk about before we get into the Intune 2408, so we'll do that towards the end before we do open Q&A. We've had a number of skilling snacks that were released by our engineering teams, 2 of which related to Intune, the mobile device management and Microsoft Intune. This is all up MDM management. So whether it's iOS, Android, Mac OS, Windows, this gets you, start to finish, how to manage all the platforms. The second link here is going cloud first with Windows device management. This is primarily cloud native. And so this is really focused mostly on Windows. So as you go through Autopilot, going through Intune, those kinds of things. So they're similar, but they're 2 actually different skilling snacks that you can go through. And I also included a link that has all of the skilling snacks. So every few sessions, we'll talk about, if there's a new skilling snack that comes out, we'll talk about what that is. But over time, as we start to introduce these and we start talking about them, you click the link and you go to the blog post that we posted of the new skilling snack, but you don't actually have a link to all of them. And so the bottom link there goes through all of the skilling snacks that were released over the last few years. So click that, bookmark it. If there's ever a time that you're thinking about something or you have to work on something new that your boss is telling you, hey, we got to focus on this new thing Microsoft is releasing, there's probably a skilling snack for it, and it's going to be at that bottom link there. So check that out. All right, so Windows Server. We don't talk about Windows Server here all that much, but I thought it was kind of cool that hot patching is now available in preview for Windows Server 2025. Those are evaluation VMs in Azure, so you're not going to be able to download media and do it on an actual physical server. But you can take a look at what the hot patching functionality is going to look like for Server 2025. So I thought this was kind of interesting. I remember the days when I had to manage data centers and going in, patching servers and, Thursday, Friday nights, Saturday nights, and going through all the servers in our DC. Hot patching would have made things a heck of a lot easier way back then. So we're going to introduce that here into Windows Server 2025. We also have, for Windows 365, back at the beginning of August, we actually released quite a few new features for Windows 365. The link there is going to take you through all of them. There's a bunch of stuff in there around SSO and a few other things. Take a look at it. If Windows 365 is of interest to you, we're constantly releasing new things around it, but definitely take a look at that. And then also the Windows app. So if you're using Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365, you've probably been using the remote desktop client to connect to your virtual machines. The Windows app, though, if you go to the Microsoft Store and just search for Windows, there's an actual app there called Windows App or Windows. That application is what allows you to connect through Windows 365 to Azure Virtual Desktop to even DevBox, and it's basically the remote app to use to connect to our remote cloud VDI services. You still will need to use like MSTSC if you're using remote desktop to connect to like an internal server. But for connecting to our cloud-based resources, the Windows app is what you should be looking at using moving forward. And so I've got a link there that it kind of explains all the different platforms that you'll connect to through the Windows app. But we've been making a lot of improvements to it, and so that's why I've included the link here. For Microsoft Entra, last week we talked quite a bit about Entra, a number of different features and things that were released over the summer. But this week, not a whole lot was announced between last meeting and this meeting. However, what I wanted to do is reiterate the point that MFA enforcement, when signing into the Azure portal, Entra, and Intune portals, it's going to be in effect starting on or after October 15th. So if you signed into any one of those portals over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, you've probably seen a notification that, hey, we're going to enforce MFA. There's also a message center post on it as well, so there should be plenty of notification for you to know that MFA is coming. In that link, though, if you click on it, this is a blog post that came out today. In that link, there is a form that you can fill out if you want to exempt your tenant. I haven't actually looked at the form. I don't know who it goes to, or I don't have any details on what the form actually does. All I know is I saw that there's a link in there that you can click on if you needed to exempt yourself for whatever reason where you can't do MFA. But if you can do it, and it's going to be required October 15th or later. Okay, so Intune 2408. So lots of stuff was announced, released, I think, that's pretty interesting, and that I want to actually go through some of these things, not just talk about a bunch of links on a screen. So I'm going to stop the share. We'll come back here if you want to click on some of this stuff later, you can. But we'll stop the share and we'll actually go through some of these things. So let me stop that. And go. So, and that. Okay. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to pull up the what's new page. Okay. So normally whenever we release something new for Intune, there's a blog post that comes out which talks about like 3 features and probably 3 things that you may or may not care about. But if you go into the what's new for Intune page, and I try to include a link to it, and there is a link to it in the deck for today. I always try to include a link to this location here, because this is really where all of the info is. Because there's a lot of things in here that I think are probably more useful to you than maybe some of the things that we might call out in the blog post that we post. The blog post is useful, but sometimes it doesn't have everything that you might be interested in. So the first thing that we had that we posted here is that there's now an easy way to create endpoint privilege management elevation rules. So for those of you that are using the Intune suite, endpoint privilege management is a feature of the Intune suite, and it effectively allows you to make all of your users standard users, and then we can elevate the user, the applications that they want to run, to allow them to only run those applications as administrator, but everything else that they're doing is still standard user. So with EPM, what we're doing in the 2408 release of Intune is we're actually allowing you to easily create your rules instead of having to go and get the file information, the hash of the file or the certificate information about it. Now you can basically go to the reports and click on the elevation attempts that have happened within your organization, and you can see what other people are trying to elevate, and you can make rules based off of the data that is in the report. So it makes it a lot easier for you to generate the rules, makes it a lot faster for our Intune admins to be able to do that. We've also introduced a new feature in advanced analytics within the Intune suite for resource performance. And so what this does is it allows you to see both CPU and RAM information about your environment. And so if you click into the docs here, there's actually a picture of what that report looks like. It's kind of fuzzy here. At least that could just be my eyes. Yeah, I can't zoom in on that easy. But what this will show you is on the insights and recommendations on the right-hand side, you'll see here that it says that you have this tenant has 81,000 physical devices with high RAM usage. You have 4,000 physical models with high RAM usage. You've got a number of cloud PCs with the above spike time percent on CPU. So we can now tell you not just startup performance, because that's what we used to tell you before in terms of what's going on from a performance standpoint on your device. We would tell you in endpoint analytics that, oh, your startup performance, your boot times are long. Well, now we can also tell you that you've got a lot of machines that are spiking CPU. And then we can even break that down based on device. So you can go into the device performance tab that's up here at the top. You'd click into that, and then it'll tell you per device which models or which devices are the ones that have high CPU or high RAM usage. And so those could be models where it could be an application that's causing that problem, or it could just be that you have old hardware. And this is hardware that should probably be aged out. And so if you're looking for hardware to prioritize when it comes to device refresh, this type of reporting can help you zero in on which machines are the ones that are probably the worst off, and those users should probably be prioritized over others. And so for app management, manage home screen for Android Enterprise, fully managed devices, that's now supported. We've made some updates to the discovered apps report within Intune. So and this is something that I don't think a lot of people know about, but if you go under apps and you click on monitor, there's this discovered apps monitor. It's not a report, but it's under this monitor section within apps. When you click on this actually shows you all of the Win32 and Windows Store or UWP apps that are on your devices. So these are all the apps that are installed on your machine. It's not just a subset. It used to only be that we would see like the store apps. This was a long time ago, but you'd only see like the store, the UWP apps that were on the machine. But over the last, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years, we've added the Win32 apps in here as well. So again, it's not a report. It's not under the reports node, but it's under this monitor node, which I think a lot of people kind of miss. They don't realize that it's there. So when you click on that, go to Discovered Apps. This shows you all of those apps. You can sort by device count. You can sort by some of the other columns as well. So you can see which of your applications are installed within the organization. But we've also added this. So in 24.8, what we added is we added the application publisher column. So now we show you what your application publisher is. Clearly, we should probably do something about the certificate because all this is showing for a lot of the Microsoft apps are certificates. And I think a lot of these apps look to be store UWP apps. So it could be that we're parsing just the certificate rather than who the publisher is. But if you look at something like OneDrive here, OneDrive gives you the actual publisher. So store apps look like we've got some work that we got to do on that. But if you had third parties like Adobe or whoever else, you should see the application publisher as Adobe. So just something additional that we've added to this report, but I wanted to call it out because I don't think that too many folks actually are aware that this data is here. And also you can export this data as well. So clicking on export will export this out to a CSV file. I've had a few customers ask me about like, hey, how can I get a dump of all of the applications that are in our tenant, or at least that are on all of our devices within our tenant? And so this is an easy way to do that. Let's see what else. Let's go back here. We've also made some improvements to the Intune management extension logs. What we've done now is we've created a new log called app workload log. And effectively all this is doing is we've taken the Win32 app logging information that's in the Intune management extension log, and we've broken it out into a separate log file. So it's not as messy. Because if you've ever tried to troubleshoot Intune Win32 apps that are being deployed, it can get kind of noisy in that log to be able to track and follow what's happening. So what we've done is, if you know where the logs are, then you've probably seen all this before. But if you've never done it before, never seen where the logs are, go to C, Program Data, Microsoft Intune Management Extension, and all of the logs are here. And this is just only for the Intune Management Extension. It's not for everything. But for like your Win32 app deployments, this is where you would see that tracked. Also like Intune scripts, remediation scripts. There's a number of things that we track in the Intune Management Extension, but we don't do everything in here. But what you'll notice though is if you've been here before, this log just came within 2408. So app workload is the Win32 app. So this is where we just show all of the Win32 app data. I don't think there's any changes here in terms of the actual logging itself. I think the logging is all the same. I think all we've really done here, from at least how I looked at this, is it looks like we've just taken all of the stuff that was prefixed by Win32 app, and we've just kind of shoved it over into this new app workload log. So it makes it a lot easier to track your app installs, because before you would see like a Win32 app line, and then you would see like a completely irrelevant line to your Win32 app installs. So then you'd have to go and scroll down a bunch and then find the next line that was related to the app install. And so it was kind of a mess trying to go back and forth. And so you'd have to do filtering and all this other stuff to kind of track it. So it's actually a good change, I think. I think it's good to have that broken out. And so when you look at the Intune Management Extension log now, it's much quieter, I think. You don't have all the Win32 stuff in there mixed in with everything else. And so if you're trying to track like a PowerShell script, for instance, now all that stuff should be all in line. You shouldn't have like PowerShell and then Win32 app and something else, and then, trying to filter it down to track what you're looking for. So it should be a little bit easier to go through the logs this way. Let's see, let's go back here. Okay. Device config. So we've added a number of new things for Apple device management, whether it's iOS or macOS. We've got some declarative device management DDM settings that we're adding, and then we have some macOS for SSO. Yeah, so if Mac management is your thing, or iOS or Apple devices, if you're moving from Jamf or another platform to Intune, just know that we're constantly adding new settings to Mac and Apple devices. So it seems like every month we've got something new for the Apple platforms. We've also added some enhancements to the multi-admin approval. The only enhancement really here, and for those that don't know, let's actually talk about this a bit. So multi-admin approval, it's a setting over here underneath tenant administration. And this is where you can set, if you have multi-admin approval turned on, then you have the ability to require an additional admin to allow for scripts, Windows apps, and these new access policies here. So for instance, if you've come from the config manager world, when you would push out a script, pushing out a script actually required you to have someone else approve that deployment. So that way you're not accidentally deploying a script that would like impact, thousands of devices and cause problems. So multi-admin approval basically takes on that same thing we used to do in config manager and just brings it over into Intune. So for PowerShell scripts, for but for application deployments, those features can be managed by multi-admin approval. So if someone's pushing an app to everything, you could have another admin approve that push to make sure that everything looks good before it goes out to everyone. So it's not for every deployment type within Intune. It's not for policies and for a number of other things, but it's really just for your scripts and for your app deployments and then these new access policies. That's the new thing that we're adding, is that we're adding a new access policy to the admin approval feature to allow for approvals. So what this basically means is that when you create a multi-admin approval policy, you can create an access policy. Well, now, if someone were to create an access policy within multi-admin approval, it's going to require another admin to approve it if you set that up. So if you're interested in that, take a look at multi-admin approval if you have multiple admins that are managing your Intune environments. We've got device enrollment. So account-driven Apple user enrollment is now generally available for iOS and iPadOS 15 Plus. We've got some new corporate Microsoft Entra accounts to enable Android enterprise management options in Intune. We've included that. 20 Binance, that's for China. New CPU architecture filter. So with the new Copilot Plus PCs, new ARM-based devices that are coming out now, we should start to see more of the business devices start shipping this month. So if you're looking at like the Surface Laptop 7th edition, which comes with the ARM Qualcomm Snapdragon processor, or any other vendors that are coming out with the Copilot Plus PCs, because they have the ARM CPU architecture rather than AMD 64, we have now added a new CPU architecture filter. So you can create a device filter in Intune to filter out or include or exclude ARM-based devices if that's something that's going to be important to you. But it also works for Mac OS as well. So it's not just a Windows thing, but it's primarily, because we now have these other CPU architecture types with Windows, that it's important for us to get this out. Now, one of the things that kind of drove me crazy, I don't know if it drove any of you guys crazy too, but anytime you went into endpoint security policies and you went to go deploy something, whether it was an antivirus policy or disk encryption, you'd go click in there, and then for the platform, it gives you 4 different platforms for Windows. You'd have Windows 10 and later, you'd have Windows 10 and later with Config Manager, Windows 10, 11, and Windows Server, and then Windows 10, 11, and Server with Config Manager. And so you'd get this list, you'd have this list of all these platform types, and you'd be like, well, which one do I pick? Am I picking the right one? Because Windows 10 and later would obviously include Windows 10, 11, and Server. So that doesn't make any sense. And then I can kind of understand the Config Manager thing. Like if I'm not using Config Manager, I probably shouldn't touch that. And so I should probably pick one of these 2. So, but which one of these do I pick? And am I breaking something if I pick the wrong one? So we finally made the change to consolidate this into something that makes more sense. So now when you go here and go and try to create an endpoint security policy, you'll now just be presented with either Windows or Windows and Config Manager. So I was looking at this, just before our call, just to make sure that this actually is live. And when you go and create one, it does actually just show you Windows or Windows and Config Manager. You don't have 4 different Windows things to try to figure out if you're doing the right thing. But while we're here, so if you're creating any antivirus policies within your tenant, I still see customers doing the old way, where you would go under devices, you go to configuration, you go pick your policy, whether it's going to be Defender, if you want to go, there's endpoint protection or device restrictions, you can go pick some Defender settings out of there and deploy them through here, or you can even deploy BitLocker through here. Ideally, what you should be doing is actually doing this all through the endpoint security blade. So if you have a BitLocker policy that's configured in the other location, you should be looking to move that over to this new experience, or this newish experience. It's been around for a little while now. We recommend this for a few different reasons, but one of those reasons is actually if you're using Defender for Endpoint. So if you're using Defender for Endpoint, so if you go to security.microsoft.com, you can actually create policies for security in Defender for Endpoint as well. So if you have a security team and you have a endpoint management team, and they're 2 different teams, they aren't doing the same work, it'd be kind of nice to know what the other is doing as it pertains to security. And so if we go under endpoints and we go to configuration management, we look at our endpoint security policies, what you'll see here is that I've got policies that are the same from my Intune side of things. So here I've got this BitLocker policy, and if you see how it's named, we go back over here, we'll see that my BitLocker policy is named the exact same way. And it's because I created that policy here in Intune, but it shows up over here in Defender for Endpoint. And so if you're not doing this, if you're not creating your policy here for BitLocker and you've created it over in your device configuration settings, which this is where people used to do it, this is where we forced you to do it. The endpoint security blade hasn't always been there. So it's not of any fault of your own for doing it this way. It's just that this is how you had it set up originally. You should be looking to migrate these things over to endpoint security. So anything that's over there that you can do in endpoint security, do it over here. Because if you are using Defender for Endpoint, you can now see this here. And it's also vice versa. So if your security team creates a new policy over here for something, like if they're the ones that are responsible for setting up Defender antivirus or the exclusions, then they can go through and do that here, and it'll show up in the other location. I'm not going to set anything here. I'm just going to go through and create the policy. I'm going to exclude something. Okay. All right, save that. And so we should see over in the other environment now, they should see a test AV policy. So Defender antivirus exclusions, I should see this somewhere here. Yeah, so this one right here. So it works both ways when you create those policies. So make sure that that you're monitoring this too, because if your security team's doing something, you might not even be going in here. You may not, as an Intune admin, you may not even be looking at endpoint security, but you might start to notice that, oh wait, I'm seeing things here, but I don't remember setting those. It could be that someone set them over here in the Defender for Endpoint console, and that's where these things are showing up. I saw a question from Michael. Michael, you want to come off mute?
Yes, thank you. I think this is an interesting discussion because what you'll likely find if you're looking around at blogs, getting advice from other people, is do not use what you are suggesting that we use. So I actually started using some of that stuff initially, like the baselines before they were changed recently, and haven't gone back. So I guess I just want to let people in the room know that you might come across information that is completely saying the opposite of what Richard is saying to us, and it's interesting. So I don't know if it's something we should move back to. We don't have it. We have a security team, but we don't have a security team who is invested yet in doing security stuff in Intune. So that's not like something where it's really beneficial to us to hand off this little section of Intune to somebody. They just don't do that. So you might run into challenges with that as well, where just how you're organized and who's looking at this information, it might be better for you to not use that stuff because it is architected differently. It does behave differently than other sections of Intune.
Yeah. Now, what I want to be clear on here is that the settings here, we're using the same policies. So it's all the same CSPs, whether you create something in the endpoint security blade within Intune, or you create it under devices and you go to device config and you use either a template or settings catalog. At the end of the day, it's all a policy that's backed by a CSP, or it could be an ADMX backed policy that's backed by GPO. But the policies are all the same. The difference, though, is that when you do it over here, other people can see it if they're managing through Defender for Endpoint. Now, BitLocker being one of those things, I think Dan, I'm looking at the chat right now, Dan says endpoint security and BitLocker were broken for a while. BitLocker is kind of interesting in both areas because the BitLocker policies, they don't map one-to-one in terms of the UI. So when you go through and you create your policy over here for BitLocker, and then you go and compare it to what's in device configuration for your device restrictions, when you compare both of them together, like the settings just don't look like they match because the words that we use to describe each of the settings are actually different. And so I spent a long time actually kind of going through this, and I created a device best practices for education. I can post a link to that here. Hang on a sec, bars in the way. aka password is /EDU DC. So in here, I've got a settings reference on BitLocker, and this actually goes through like all the settings you should set for BitLocker, and this is how I've been able to work with customers to get silent configuration of BitLocker configured. So users aren't being prompted for anything. And this is all using the endpoint security blade. It's not using the settings for the device configuration that we used to use. So I can post a link directly to that if that's helpful. Yeah, okay. So that's the BitLocker stuff. Yeah, and it's true that, well, what Michael's saying about this is a good discussion of things that you might find on the internet. Like if you find an old blog post or something, a lot of blog posts that are from the last, if they're more recent, then I'm hoping that our MVPs or folks that are posting these blog posts are using this section. But if they're not, then they're going to use the old section. And it's not the end of the world if you're using the other settings. But if you are using Defender for Endpoint and you've got access, and this is if you're an A5 customer. So if you're using Defender for Endpoint P2, not just Defender to manage like antivirus, like the antivirus is baked into Windows, that's also Defender for Endpoint. We call it Defender for Endpoint P1. What I'm talking about is P2, where you have access to like the EDR functionality and all that. That's this other portal over here. If you're not an A5 customer, you don't have Defender for Endpoint P2, then this largely doesn't matter. But we are still recommending customers, even if you're not using it, to move everything over here. But it's not going to break things if you have something in one section. If you're still using the old stuff, that still continues to work. But start to migrate if you haven't, or if you can. Okay, what's next here? Target date and time for Apple software update enforcement schedules. What is this? So target date time setting for Apple software update enforcement schedules, updates using the local time on devices. That's a mouthful. But it looks like we're making some changes to how we do software updates, leveraging local time on devices. So you can leverage that setting within Intune for iOS and macOS devices. And then I think that's it. That's it for all the 2408 stuff. Yep, that's it. So at this point, we can flip over to open Q&A. I know there's been a lot in the chat. Let me see what's in here. Oh, Jesse wants a cheat code to get Intune Suite. Yeah, I wish I could give you guys cheat codes. Unfortunately, I don't have enough money to give you guys cheat codes. All right, Leaf, you're asking what about zero admins? I don't know, Leaf, you want to talk?
We were talking about the multi-admin tenant stuff.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, what if I have, because like literally the Intune guy literally just moved his desk and he's now in a different department managing something else.
I think what that means is you're the Intune admin now, since you're
Damn
the one that joins the call.
I got Valen promoted.
I'm telling you, you are now the admin. This is now your role. When can we replace all of our computers with PI5?
RPi5.
And we got Sentinel Security Blade. Okay, BitLocker Endpoint Security Policy broken for a while. So y'all are recommending we do anything security related for Defender inside of Intune and not in the security world. No, that's not what I'm recommending, Anthony. What I'm saying is that anything that's done in Intune for security, or if it's done in endpoint security, these views are the same. Now, the difference, though, is that everything kind of falls underneath this one endpoint security policies blade. You see, I've got BitLocker, I've got Defender Antivirus, I've got Windows Security Experience for tamper protection. I've got these different policy types in here. In Intune, we break that up. So for antivirus, I've got Defender Antivirus, I've got Security Experience, and then I've got my exclusions here. But then I also have disk encryption, which is broken up into its own little node. So these get broken up, but at the end of the day, they all can be viewed in either portal. So if if your security team is responsible for the security settings, if they're responsible to set BitLocker and Defender and all that stuff, that's fine. Make sure they're doing it from here. So that way the Intune admin can see, okay, the security team set the antivirus policies. I'm not touching those, but I can see them. I can see what's being done and vice versa. If you set those policies up, if the security team's not responsible for doing the security settings, they're just responsible for telling you to do them, which is what that to me at least happens most often, is that the security team will tell the endpoint team to go and set up the policies. Like, hey, we need this antivirus policy set, or we need, you know, XYZ settings set. And so that's the work that you need to do. Then you would do it from the Intune portal, and then they would see it in their security portal. So I'm not saying do one or the other in one place. What I am suggesting, though, that what you should do if you have policies that are over here, like if we create, or I'll just use my BitLocker policy from here. So I've got this BitLocker policy that's using the configuration settings for the endpoint protection type. So if I click into this policy, you can't see this one over in the Defender for Endpoint Security portal. You can't see any of the settings that I've set here because we don't give you a view into these policies. So what I am saying is that if you have policies that are set under device configuration that can be set in the endpoint security blade, move those and set those over there. Don't set them over here because your security team can't see them. And so this way there's visibility for both teams to understand what the other is doing. Okay. What's a security team? Yeah. Yeah, in some organizations they've got a security team. All right. All right. Any other questions? Now's your time. Open mic. Anything goes. I don't promise to have an answer to your question. Maybe someone else will, but it's a good opportunity to ask anything right now if you want. If you have it.
Hey, Rich. This is Scott. I have a question about TAP, temporary access pass.
Mm-hmm.
Is that too much off topic, or is that okay?
You can ask it. I don't know if I'll have an answer to it though.
Okay. Very cool tool for our level 1s and level 2s to help prep machines for our end users. But there's concern from higher level as to whose accounts you can enact a TAP request on, and also establishing some type of communication workflow. If it that you can limit TAP access to just certain security group and not another one, or if you could establish some kind of automate thing that would communicate to an end user when a TAP request was initiated for their account.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. Is anyone here actually using TAP?
I am.
Okay.
My 2 cents is that there's 2 ways to do it. You can either do it through an administrative unit. So you build an administrative unit in your Entra ID. So like only those users can manage that set. That like you build an administrative users, you put your users in it, you set your help desk to be able to administer those users in that administrative unit, and then you would give them that access, if that makes sense. So look up administrative units in O365 or in Entra. That's what you want to go with. If anybody else has anything else?
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. So is it my 3?
Yes, it is Maitri. I have a small question because we are just onboarding our onboarding to Intune. We just set up the pilot and we are doing the co-management with the configuration, like configuration manager setup.
Mhm.
Only thing is like we are brand new to Intune and all those things. When we have some problem, when we open the ticket through this help and troubleshooting and support,
Mhm.
they always tell, oh, it's not our place to see, or we don't do use it. And one of the good helper, they told, now onwards, it's a paid ticket for all the SCCM or MECM related questions. Is it true that we need to pay for any problem we have that connection between SCCM and Intune?
That's a good question. I don't know. Usually the way on-prem products work is the support for them is a paid service, whereas if it's a cloud service, it's not. But you're kind of in this interesting spot where you're trying to get to the cloud, but you're in that hybrid state where you've got on-prem and you're trying to move all that stuff up to Intune. So in my opinion, it probably shouldn't be charged, but no one really pays me for my opinion. So it's not
Yeah,
really
because we opened like a 4 tickets through the admin portal.
okay.
They all are that, oh, we don't support this one, or somebody, it's like, then someone told, no, it became like a paid as you go. It's like, okay. Otherwise, you are like what they call premier support of Microsoft. That
Right.
costs a lot. So that's why I just wanted, because my manager asked me to ask you guys that is it true or not? That's it.
Yeah, shoot me an email. I put my email address in the chat. Shoot me an email there, and let's talk about this offline.
Sure.
To see if there's anything we can do to get you the help you need.
Yeah, because we are just starting, right? We have a lot of like humps on the road. So we are trying to get one by one.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see. What else we have in the chat here? Any other questions?
Just really quick, going back to the previous about the co-management. We do co-management at our university, so if there's any questions about that, then I could try and help you out if you want to have a discussion offline about that. We use co-management just for application deployment. We're not doing any kind of hybrid join or anything like that. We just have a large investment in 1,000+ applications in Config Manager and don't want to have to repackage those for Intune or have to manage them in 2 places, at least not right now. But our co-management works fine, so I'm happy to talk about that if you'd like.
Thank you. Could you please send me your email address? If I have any question, I can ask.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thanks a lot, Michael. All right, we've got 10 minutes left. Any other questions? Could wrap early. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then we'll go ahead and wrap up a little. Oh, wait, we've got Jesse saying, should we hold all of our platform SSO questions for next time? Yes, definitely hold your platform SSO questions for next time. I'm the last person you want to talk to about Mac OS management. So definitely hold those for Arnab. He's the expert on that. So he will be glad to answer all of your platform SSO questions. We will have plenty. All right. Ask Arnab about Apple Federation. Yeah, definitely hold all those questions to the 17th. All right, folks. Well, if that's it, then thanks for joining. Remember, tell your friends or tell any of your other coworkers that aren't on the invite that there's a new invite out there. Forward that off to them just so that way we can get everyone back in. And with that, have a good rest of your day. We'll get the recording and everything else up later on, and we'll talk to you on the 17th. Take care. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.